right, good morning, everyone. Ooh, let's try that again. Good morning. All right, great to see you all. Thank you for joining this conversation. You're going to hear a lot from the folks on the stage, so before we get started, it would be good to know who you all are. So show of hands if you are working in or building a venture in Africa in the audience. All right, awesome. Investing or interested in investing in Africa? All right, I did that for the people who are building, so you know who to, just gotta connect, yeah, like make eye contact, please. Just interested in learning more about the ecosystem, if that's what brings you here. Okay, awesome, so a little something for everybody. Before I turn it over to the panelists, if you could just shout out if you know the answer to this question. What share of the world's population is African today? Just don't be shy, guess. Somebody scream it out. 5%? 15, I think I heard 15. That is very close, 16% today. And what share of the world's population will be African in 2050? About 25. So 1 in 4 people in just a few decades will be an African, which as an African, I think is a very exciting thing, and that will, I think, come up a lot in the conversation today. That's why the work that these folks are doing, to me at least, feels very timely and very exciting. So to kick it off, I will not introduce our panelists. You can read about them on the app. But the workforce of the future is African, and so our objective today is to discuss what it takes to train that workforce and scale education ventures across the continent and where we are headed. So I'll ask if each of you could just tell us your name, tell us what your company or your venture does, and why it matters. And we can just go down the line, Fadl.
Hi, my name is Fadl Tarzi. I'm the founder of Nexford University. So we are an education to employment, so think of it as an end-to-end education to employment platform anchored in a next generation university. The reason it matters is because we aim to equip learners across the world, regardless of their location, their age, their gender, their socioeconomic background, with the skills they need to access the virtual talent grid, as we call it. So essentially rendering their location no longer relevant to their opportunity to access or their ability to access economic opportunities.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Veda Sunassee. I am from Mauritius. I am the CEO of the African Leadership University. We have a campus in Mauritius and one in Rwanda. We are part of the broader African Leadership Group founded by Fred Swaneker. Some of you may know of him. We have education institutions across the continent. In South Africa, we have the African Leadership Academy, which is a pre-university program. And Fred is currently working on something called ALX, which is sort of, outside of the regulated, education environment that I operate in higher ed. Our vision is to develop, identify, develop, and create opportunities for young Africans from all over the continent. We believe that the continent needs ethical entrepreneurial leaders. So our programs have a huge focus on entrepreneurship because we think it's important to create. I mean, you gave the stats. It's very important for us to create opportunities for the youth, but also prepare the youth to become job creators themselves, right? Something else to add to your data point is, we're looking at a continent of 1.3 billion people with a median age of 19.7 years old. That's over 600 million people who are under the age of 19. In Africa, only 8% of people who finish high school go on to university. So there's a massive need for higher learning opportunities. So we're trying to have a small impact in that realm.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Bola Lawal. I'm from Nigeria. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ScholarX. ScholarX just launched a product called LearnAM. LearnAM means learn it in Pidgin English. So I'll explain LearnAM this way. If you think of a Udemy or Coursera that you can learn in Pidgin English, you can learn skills, vocational skills, digital skills. That's what we're doing. We really believe that We started this idea from the pandemic. So a lot of people were out of work, and we noticed that the field that could work with digital, they could operate their phones, they could do certain things with their phones. So that's why we started LearnAM in 2016. So I'll try to keep it short because we have a lot to talk about. But why what we are doing is important is, according to the World Bank, by 2030, 230 million jobs in Africa alone will require some sort of digital skills. And let me leave you with this. Today, internet penetration in Africa, not mobile penetration, internet penetration, people that are online, is about 15%. So if you think about the demand of jobs by 2030 versus the amount of people that are online, what we are doing is extremely important.
Thank you, Bella, and thank you, everyone. In that backdrop, I think we're all very focused on the statistics, and just, anytime I just spent a few months in Nigeria, and you really do feel the youthfulness of the population, and I like that stat that you reminded us of, Veda, of the average age being 19. One of the things I would love for us to talk about is the African market, and especially the opportunities for market creating innovation. So right now in education in Africa, there's just a lot of non-consumption. So a lot of people aren't in any education whatsoever. So Bola, I would love if you could tell the audience, like, what is market creating innovation, and how does that impact your approach with LearnAM?
So the way I'll look at it is, I'll just approach it with other markets. Say you have a product in the US, you roll it out there, you say you're gonna charge subscription, people, subscribe, pay, if it's a good product, a lot of people use it, you become a billionaire, it's all good, right?
Very easy, just like
very easy, straightforward, a little bit. So you see a lot of products scale fast in the US, and there are a lot of quick unicorns. But then when you come to our continent, come to Africa, unfortunately, there's certain things we don't have. A lot of people don't have money. The poverty rate is high. We have a lot of infrastructural deficits. If you think about data, for example, data in Africa is probably one of the most expensive in the world. I know a friend that was saying that at a point, running his office the data cost in his office in Lagos, Nigeria, was more expensive than in New York. And if you know New York, you know how expensive of a city New York is, and data is more expensive to run. And so market creating innovation, this is from the book by Efosar Jaman and late Professor Clay Christensen, discussing yes, I know some investors will frown about, if you have to create the market, if you have to start from scratch, maybe it's not something you should do. But if you think about us, we don't have a choice. Market creating innovation is simply that you are going to sort of build a market out of something that is a need or is necessary. If you think about how they did with insurance, individual insurance in Africa, or even if you come to Nigeria, the emergence of mobile phones. Now we have all kinds of phones now, and I can remember even buying a SIM card. Some of us laugh because the younger generation couldn't even understand the amount of money paid to buy a SIM card. People here can't even comprehend that people used to pay to get a SIM card in their phone. And when we first started in Nigeria, when they brought mobile phones, they had to pay. But then look at how everything has evolved now. The advent of mobile networks, mobile phones, all those things they never existed, they were created, and now it's leaped and helped other things within the ecosystem. And so marketing, creating innovation is really about what's the problem, how can you build a market around it, and get people to, at the end of the day, pay for services, which I'm sure the whole payment thing is going to come up, because one of the big things when you pitch EdTech, particularly in Africa, they let you speak, they let you talk, and they're like, so who's going to pay for it?
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. And the way, another way I think about it is, how do we take things that were previously expensive and therefore only for the rich and expand them to a mass market? So, for example, higher education today in Africa is not a mass market product the way it is in Western countries. And so entrepreneurs who want to work there have to create that market. So, Fadl, when you're talking to investors, as you have for Nexford, what do you think that capital allocators, whether it's a VC or a finance institution, need to understand about a place where you have to create the market?
I mean, first, it requires, I think, a certain type of investor, right? So we learned this the hard way, like, so being based in the US, but, targeting emerging markets, not a lot of US VCs have an understanding of emerging markets or even have a desire, frankly. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? The US is a big enough market, so, not everyone has to be emerging markets focused. But having said that, we found that it boils down to really trying to understand what is the customer motivation and the incentive to adopt the product that you're selling. So investors can relate to that because, humans are humans regardless of their location. So once I think investors started to understand why is it that this, African learner in Nigeria or Kenya or South Africa that's on the sideline now, has a need for your product, and is that desire there in the first place, but the desire hasn't been converted to a purchase because the supply hasn't existed. That's a very different problem to tackle versus the desire is non-existent in the first place. So you're going to educate the customer why they need to get educated, and then hope that once they do get educated, they fulfill their objectives, right? That's a very difficult task, right? But the reality is there is actually hunger for education in Africa, so it's very different from other markets. Whether a market like Nigeria or others, like you just look at the supply-demand mismatch. Out of about 4 million high school grads, 1.8 million apply for college in Nigeria. So yes, it's a small number, but only 800,000 of those get in, purely based on supply-demand shortage. So I think it boils down to sort of that commonality that VCs can understand. What is the customer pain point, and how is your solution going to help that? And do they recognize that pain point exists in the first place?
And then having the patience to wait it out for for the supply to meet that demand. As we think about scaling, and each of you is sort of scaled in different ways, Veda, I'd love to talk a bit more about ALU. So I think the Mauritius campus launched in 2015, and then at Rwanda a couple of years later. And if I remember, the original vision was to have many campuses throughout the continent. What have been some of the obstacles to achieving that scale, and how have you all adjusted the strategy to address those?
I have a laundry list of obstacles, but I'll focus on one because I think it's connected to a number of other obstacles, and it's actually regulation. To put it simply, actually, I was in this room yesterday listening to the panel by the MENA community, and there was a colleague, I can't recall from what country she's from, talking about regulation being a huge problem for them as well. And I think it's a problem because we've inherited a regulatory framework in Africa, at least in higher ed, that is deeply colonial. And funny enough, a lot of the countries from which we've inherited the systems have moved on to more progressive approaches. I have stories for days if I start telling them around, from the regulators coming to my office with a measuring tape and measuring the size of my office, right? Because that is a requirement. To different jurisdictions where you need a certain number of hectares of land to be able to start a university. You're facing a similar challenge as well right now as you're figuring out accreditation on the continent. It matters because in a highly regulated environment where you can't innovate very quickly, you're looking at a product that you can first of all, from the time you've designed to the time that you can launch it, because you've got to go through a regulatory process, it can be anywhere between 9 months and 12 months, right? So you can't innovate fast enough, right? And the other challenge with that is that, because you've got so many requirements, right, especially in the old traditional brick and mortar higher ed space, you're just running a business that's hugely capital intensive. Just listening, it's interesting to hear your perspectives. And when we started, and this is public news, so I don't mind sharing it, we actually started as a for-profit. the idea, original vision from Fred was that, we're going to be able to, there is a middle class in Africa that can afford, and we will be able to generate revenues and then use the revenues to be able to scale. That turned out not to be true, right? It's hugely capital intensive. That middle class that, we've made many assumptions about in Africa is not quite there. So we've had to pivot, and most recently with the pandemic, biggest silver lining for me personally with the pandemic was to see regulators shift their body language. In the regulatory framework. I actually took a bit of a sabbatical, and I was doing some consulting. I remember consulting with the Ministry of Education of Mauritius, and to hear the same ministry that has been resistant to technology say point blank that indefinitely going forward, we're going to have to be a hybrid model, because if we have another pandemic, we will need to be able to pivot quickly. So that kind of newfound appetite for innovation in the education space was really interesting to me, right? And we're trying to leverage that right now to modify our model, make it more tech-enabled and more distributed, so we're not married to these two campuses, sort of the brick and mortar campuses.
Yeah, I think that, COVID changed everything in many ways. What do you all think about the potential for leapfrogging? I feel like leapfrogging is always something people talk about when it comes to Africa. Like, we are just gonna go 40 years ahead of the West, and I guess maybe we did that with telephony, right? We didn't get all the landlines, and we skipped to mobile. But do you think there's opportunity for leapfrogging in education, and what would that look like? Fadl, go ahead. I feel like you're...
I think so. I mean, often we talk about the stats and bureaucracy in Africa and so forth, but to be honest, it's the same in many places in the world. Like, even from a regulatory perspective, like, we're regulated in the US, they come to your office and they ask, like, why using a shared space? Like, so the same questions. They're not necessarily measuring, but they're sort of, behind the scenes, they definitely are. So bottom line is, leapfrogging is a reality. It's not a theory. And Africa has multiple success stories in leapfrogging on mobile and mobile wallets, on even, in informatics and software. Like, we were just telling, a few colleagues yesterday an example of, one of our learners who we wanted to hire. We put out a BI role, and we spent 3 months interviewing for that role. Maybe 100 candidates interviewed from all across the world. One of them applied, turned out to be an Nexford MBA learner. Couldn't hire him, as a learner, going to have access to all our BI systems. Long story short, we waited for him to graduate to hire him. That's how good he was. Joined us. 3 months later, got double the salary from Microsoft and left us. So
story of an African entrepreneur's life.
Yeah, but the point is, I mean, leapfrogging is real from a career perspective and from a technology perspective. You have tons of folks today, not millions, but you have thousands across Africa who are making similar wages to folks in the US and in the UK and so forth. So the talent market has leapfrogged and is going to continue doing so. Infrastructure is going to leapfrog as well, because the fundamentals are there, and they're not just for the content's interest. The US is going to face an aging population over the coming decade, right? So will the UK. So the infrastructure is going to have to come from both local and international investors who have a real interest and need to build greater talent pools from Africa. Yeah. So it's really not a theory.
Oh, I just wanted to piggyback on what he said about the challenges. I know it talked about regulation, but I would be remiss to not also mention things like accessibility and product market fit. Good examples are LearnAM app. The reason why I'm bringing that up is when we build stuff, you have this idea in your head. You even interact with people and you think that this is exactly what they need. So once we roll out the app, we had a consultant come into town. We did a new user design sprint, went on the market, interviewed people. And the first thing they told us was, we watched the videos, but I don't know what digital skills mean. Yeah. And and they were like, but if you put it in a picture, if you put a picture of a computer, I know that it's a computer I want to learn. So even some of our verbiage now, we don't necessarily say, come learn digital skills, just come learn computer. And they know that it's that thing on there, and there are different skill sets that you can learn. So and that's one of the reasons why we also put all of our things in local dialect. Believe it or not, people studied, the lingua franca is English. People have degrees from universities, and honestly, without bashing the content or anything, sometimes it's a little bit difficult for people to even get the content as written. And I know you said something about colonial education. So it's very important about localization, not translation, but localization, because context matters. And so trying to get that product market fit can be challenging. Trying to get the context can be very challenging. And obviously, we know all the barriers to access. And so I just wanted to add that to some of the challenges.
Yeah, that's important. And so
I just wanted to comment on the leapfrog question, if
Yeah.
that's okay. If by leapfrog we're really talking about increasing the number of people on the continent to whom we can give access to that ladder of upward social mobility and help them skip a few rungs, then I think we don't have a choice. We have to find ways to leapfrog just because of the sheer numbers, right? I know from personal story, I had the opportunity through education to be able to make that leap, right? And I've seen so many of our own students, right, who've been able to do that, and it is pretty obvious. So I think the people in this room, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the work that we're doing in Africa is very important, right? I can't emphasize enough how we need to continue. We need radicals in this space. We need people who are really stretching the models and showing what are some of the most radical ways we could really approach this to lead to the right outcomes and the right impacts. And yeah, so I think leapfrogging is necessary, and we need to find the ways to do it.
Yeah, I think the question is, what is the way to do it? So I think a lot about China, right, who has been the country that has been the most successful in lifting, tens of millions of people out of poverty, out of extreme poverty. And a lot of that went through manufacturing as a route, right? And when we talk about Africa's story, we often think, could we do it through services? I love, Fadl, you'll have to remind me of the phrase you used. Was it the virtual grid for?
Yeah.
Oh, cool, got it. The idea of the virtual grid, but maybe talk a little bit more about, other than capital, some of the obstacles to making that virtual grid a real reality, not just for the top 1% of Africans, but for the people who are using LearnAM and don't know what digital skills mean.
Yeah. I mean, good question, but just for context, the gap may not be as big as we perceive it to be. In the US, only about a third of the population actually has a college degree. In Africa, if you say 8 to 10%, but you look at per capita income in the U.S. and every other metric, they're more like 10x. The Africa. So the gap isn't actually as bad as it appears to be. But that aside, infrastructure, to your point earlier, so long as data costs are expensive, that's definitely a barrier. I think awareness and cultural awareness from a social perspective is really important. And this may sound a bit subjective, but families, in many instances we've seen, a 19-year-old graduates high school or 18-year-old and goes and gets an online degree and then tells their father, I'm going to work as a business analyst or project manager from home for a company in Texas. And their father's like, what the hell? Get a real job and go work at the bank, right? So that's there's a big cultural element that inhibits people's ability to move forward, both from an education and a career perspective, because the what the hell also comes earlier when they tell them I'm going to study online in the first place. So in many instances, and even from a social construct perspective, right, the guy's going to propose to a girl, first thing your in-laws are going to ask, hey, do you have a college degree? You say no, don't bring him home. So there are like these social concepts that are very real and impact people's ability to move forward. I think there's that. And then to your point, and I love the work you guys are doing on the coding or sort of computer science front, but equally, the soft skills are definitely the number one missing skill. So you hire a programmer and you're a company in Texas, you hire that programmer in South Africa. If they don't have basic communication skills, no matter how good of a programmer they are, first of all, they're capped in terms of their ability to move forward in their career. Second, it just becomes like the cost differences no longer justify the benefits of outsourcing. Like, if it's 20, 30% cheaper, but you can't communicate with that person, it's just not worth it. So I think soft skills are still by far the most important skill people need to master.
Oh, wow. So I wanted to chime in on the gap thing, because while we may look at it from the standpoint of, the gap is not that wide, but let's look at some of the basic things, solutions that we currently have, things like Nexford. Only a capped amount of people in Nigeria, for example, can discover Nexford, can discover Kibo. And there's a whole lot of people that are excluded right now. And so while we talk about the whole leapfrog thing, so we're still trying to get to the platform. How can we jump? So we're still really, and it may not even take that long, but I think the key thing is to understand that we have problems, but we have multi-dimensional problems. The problems are not just one thing. You know, when I talk to some of my friends, they just sigh like, man, we have so many problems. Here we do. And it's our continent. We're not going to run away. We're going to try to solve it. So the key thing is, how do we leapfrog? We leapfrog by increasing the pipeline. Because you see the whole thing about poaching. Most companies, I have some of my friends in the room here, you're literally like a breeding ground. You're just training all this staff to be exceptional for someone else to hire. Like just today, our Android developer, my CTO told me, oh yeah, he's getting ready to leave. And now we're immune to it, but it's normal. Nobody freaks out anymore. It's just bound to happen. And so how do we leapfrog? Well, we need to have a very strong pipeline. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, EdTech didn't really exist like that the way it is in India. 50% or over 50% of India's GDP is services. So to your point, I think it's services. But we need that big pipeline so that we can turn out a lot of engineers, a lot of smart. And to soft skills point, that's a conversation for another day. But this is just some of the things that running through my head in terms of how do we leapfrog? Well, we need to get a lot of people on the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about working across countries on the continent. Of course, we don't, Africa is not a country, and so even in spite of the title of our
Newsflash.
Newsflash, the people in this room know that. But Veda, maybe you could talk to this a bit, right, with the work you've done at ALU and the AL group in general. Bola mentioned earlier the importance of not just translation, but localization. So have you, or what challenges to scaling across African countries have you guys encountered?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, right? It's one, in the group, since inception, we've always sort of tagged under a Pan-African narrative, right? Since inception, this idea of there is a rising Africa, that there is, there is something in common that we have in our journeys across countries, irrespective of the uniqueness of our challenges, and in many ways that has worked in our favor, that we were able to build these communities that are very Pan-African. But they did happen when we were able to bring people from all over Africa into very localized spaces, whether it's in Johannesburg, whether it's in Mauritius, or whether it's in Rwanda. The reason that we've been operating primarily in South Africa, Mauritius, Rwanda, and now Kenya is because these are, at least we found these to be four of the easiest sort of environments to be able to do business. While there have been challenges on the regulatory front, for instance, from everything I've heard and learned, these have been easier markets to operate in. So what is going to be interesting, I will try to answer your question maybe a year or two down the line, because now as we're going for this distributed model, right, we're going to penetrate different markets, different places, and we'll get a sense then of what some of these challenges are. So, what we're also trying to do in our new model now, putting a huge emphasis on experiential learning. So as I said, this distributed university, you come to the sort of the mothership in your first semester, and then you sort of go out into the city that you come from or the community that you care about, or you move around. A little similar to sort of the Minerva University model, right? But like the African version of that, and then sort of come back to the main campus, later on. Why? Because precisely we believe also that a lot of these solutions are localized, and in our model where we want our students to not just get a university degree for the sake of it, but we want them to really subscribe to addressing challenges and seeking opportunities in their respective communities. So we want them to be as close as possible to those spaces.
Yeah, and Fadl, I know Nexford you have you operate in Africa, but it's a global vision, and you're in many continents. Have you faced challenges just across your African markets and moving into the different markets?
I mean, I think the other folks maybe on the panel are probably better positioned to advise, because we don't necessarily have like a legal presence in any market in Africa, so everything we do is online. But I think just like any other market, having sense of community is important, and especially more so in education. So like we've had success in countries where learners feel they are part of an actual community that exists on ground. Now, whether they physically meet them, once a month or once a quarter is less so, but I think psychologically, learners want to feel they are part of a community that's, even in the US, when you look at online enrollment, there's a very clear correlation between the physical location of universities and its learners. Even if it's 100% online, the vast majority will go like within like a 60-mile radius. So part of it is, I guess, just consumer perception. Yeah,
absolutely. And Bola, I know you've been primarily focused in Nigeria, at least in this iteration. How are you thinking about other markets on the continent?
We are thinking, one, and I'll say some people don't really like saying it, especially when they work out of Nigeria. You have to look at Africa just to hedge your bets. You have currency fluctuations, we have regulations, we have all of this stuff. So some of the things, some of my friends are entrepreneurs, at least I've heard, some of the ways they look at it is, at least, if it's tough here, I can spread some of the risk around, launching in other countries, but also economies of scale, taking some things that work in here, perfecting it. But particularly how I'm looking at it is, in fintech, they say stuff about rails. The key thing to scaling, which no one has really mentioned, probably when asked, was about partnering with telcos, telecommunications companies. Look at what they've done in Kenya with M-Pesa, Safaricom, and look at the mammoth company MTN is. It was released like a couple of days ago, like MTN paid 13% of the taxes collected in Nigeria was from MTN Nigeria, one company. So those are big companies to plug on. So the way we're looking at it is some of these companies, like we have a partnership with Airtel that we're trying to implement, that we're working on implementing. We're also talking to MTN. Our plan is to be Pan-Africa, so we can put LearnAM in Zulu, in Swahili, in Twi, even in Arabic and French. There's a big French contingency in West Africa, for example. And the way we are looking at it is the easiest way for us is through these telco partnerships. We can leverage them, have their users get direct access to the platform. They can sponsor content. They can make the content available to their users. So that way, because skills training, we hear a lot, even sometimes when people say, what are you doing? It's just because they're just like, oh yeah, another one. But there are not a whole lot of people scaling this. Now, and it's challenging, but especially how we started and the funds that we got to be able to start, we feel like we have a leg up into that whole drive of scaling. Because I mentioned it earlier, 230 million jobs in Africa will require some sort of digital skills by 2030. Only about 15% of people use the internet. It's very important that we are able to get skills training at scale. Think of a stadium of like 40,000 people and they can access skills. That's how big scale across the continent we should be thinking. Not just, let's just put a store here, a skill center there. No, let's get 100 million people skilled.
Yeah.
So I'm part of the way we can do that is through partnerships, particularly through telcos.
Absolutely. The scale of the problem is big, and so the scale of the solutions have to match the problem. So, maybe the last thing I'd love for us to talk about is ecosystem building. Like, we're still very early on the continent in terms of EdTech, and to me at least, it seems as if the things that help any of us help all of us. And so, as you think about the EdTech ecosystem in Africa, and there are people in this audience who are interested in contributing, like, what are some of the things that you would want to see in the ecosystem that would enable skill for you personally and hopefully for others of us who are building as well?
I think for us, I mean, as a university, what we'd like to see isn't necessarily unique to Africa, but it's this ecosystem approach is really core to why we exist. Like, in the sense of an interoperable model is how we think of the future of a university, where people can learn from lots of different places and essentially stop in into a university, so essentially stop in and out, regardless of their career stage in their career. So I could, take a course from some location, a certificate, a Microsoft certification, where whatever I'm learning needs to be transferable to a university in and out of university, and vice versa as well. In order for universities to remain relevant, in the future, they can't sort of be on their own island. So that's sort of the ecosystem approach we think about, looking at all the other possibilities of how people can learn. There's people learn in lots of different ways outside of the university world, but universities need to recognize and assign value to that learning. So that's something we look forward to doing, on the continent as well as, all over the world, really.
Yeah.
Interesting one. Potentially controversial, but I don't know. I think it's important to bring government in this conversation, to bring public sector in this conversation. A very fascinating observation for me being at this conference. My first time is, it's very different from education conferences I've been to, right? Again, yes, we're talking about EdTech, we're talking about business, we're talking about business in the capitalist system, and which is fine. But when I think about the continent, I really think that the people who really hold the resources and could really have impact at scale in ed is actually government. And then you have some examples of countries like, Rwanda, who have been sort of keen to adopt EdTech, or just even allow more innovative models. I would just be curious to know what this room would look like if there were some more academics in the room, also some government people in the room, also looking at, how do we create an ecosystem of public-private sector to really have impact. I'd like to hope that anybody in EdTech is also driven by the impact that we can have through technology in education, not just the money.
We'd like to hope.
To piggyback just a little bit, because my answer is very straightforward, but just to piggyback on what you said. When we started, I have a lot of, within the ecosystem in Nigeria, I have quite a bit of entrepreneur friends, and once you say government, and everybody throws their hands up, and no, I don't want government. And I think it was a program in Cape Town, and someone said, the biggest government in Africa, the biggest customer in Africa for education is still government, and it might even be across the globe. But the biggest player who you're going to sell to at scale, you're not going to remove government out of that equation. Now, to the answer, what do we need for the ecosystem? Cheap data. Yeah. Cheap data.
Maybe power too. Depending on which country you're talking about. You know which country I'm talking about. Nigerians.
I heard there's some countries that are worse. I still,
Nigeria?
I don't agree.
Like who? No. Well, stop.
No, I heard this person told me, and I argued with him.
Did you hear this from Nigerians who are trying to make themselves feel better?
No.
I'm just impressed that we haven't had a Jollof war in this panel, so let's fight over power.
It's not a war when there's a winner.
Stop. Okay. On that note, we should probably end this before that. But love to end on a note of optimism. What is something that you are seeing in the ecosystem? So we just talked about things that we wish were different, but what's something that you're seeing that gives you hope and keeps you doing the work? It can be in any order, so.
I can start.
Well, I saw that, so go for it.
It seems like people are now ready to give us some money, which is fun.
What gives me hope? This, right? A community of people who are trying to tackle a very important challenge through innovation, technology, and for me that's powerful, right? That's the community, that's the ecosystem, that's the entrepreneurship that is required. Like I said, and I hope in the room there are also some radicals, people who can really show us like what the extreme solutions can look like, and we can settle somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I think it's seeing the reality of this virtual grid becoming, true. Just the other day in Heathrow Airport, I saw a huge billboard of a global PO, basically like a global employer of record. So you can hire through them anyone in the world, and then become locally compliant. They'll pay your tax. Sort of like Gusto in the US, but like a global version of that.
Yeah.
Like you would have never seen that 5 years ago in massive billboard in the airport. So the reality is there today.
Totally.
And seeing people actually get those jobs regardless of their location and be able to move up in life or move forward gives us hope.
Yeah, that connection. I think I'll answer for myself, which is just being on Discord and teaching young girls in Nairobi and Lagos, like at the same time, right? That wasn't possible 15 years ago. So I think our future is bright. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. We've come to the end of our time, and thank you to the panelists for a great conversation. Keep talking, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you at the rest of the conference.
Thank you.